Alright guys, M-Tech Guy here, and today we're taking a look at the E46, the 330i. We have a coolant leak to take care of. Yeah, believe it or not, a coolant leak on an E46. This is unheard of. Well, I've owned 3 of these now. This is my 3rd E46, so I'm no stranger to coolant leaks on these things and the repairs required. Now, as these cars are getting older, it's not uncommon to experience coolant leaks on these cars. This was the one system that kind of lets these cars down. They were alright originally, but because most of the components are made of plastic, and due to the heat cycles that they're subject to in the engine bay there, what happens over time is the plastic becomes hard, it becomes brittle, and then it starts to crack and it starts to leak. Now, there is a heck of a lot of information out there on the E46 cooling system, what can go wrong with it, how to go about repairing it, but the conclusion that most of the information comes to is just put a whole new cooling system in the car when you get it, especially if it's a bit older now, which most of them are. And that way it's a kind of set and forget. You don't really have to worry about things, about leaks and this type of thing moving forward into your ownership for a very long time. And there is a lot of truth in that, and I've said exactly the same myself on previous videos. That is the ultimate way to deal with it, and the only way you're going to get 100% certainty that it's not going to fail on you anytime soon. But it is a very expensive way of going about it. Now, I'm here to tell you today it doesn't have to be like that. We can approach things slightly differently. If we go at it with a bit of caution, then we can just address the parts that are failing, like today. And I've had it before on a previous E46, my 325i wagon. I had a coolant leak for a little while. It was dribbling onto the top of the under tray. Now, the coolant wasn't pouring out and I wasn't losing a heap of coolant. It's not like I was having to top it up really frequently, only now and again. But it was quite tricky to diagnose the leak at the time, especially if you're looking at the components when they're cold. But I drove that thing for quite some time. I just kept an eye on things, kept it topped up, kept looking under the engine bay every once in a while just to make sure things weren't getting worse. And I had been out on a long trip in the vehicle. When I got back, I jacked it up and had another look while the components were hot. Lo and behold, there was a big crack up the side of the expansion tank, which is relatively common on these cars. Now, I couldn't see it when it was cold, but I could see it when it was hot because the part had got hot and expanded and then opened the crack up and it was leaking. So it was only really leaking when it was hot, not when it was cold. So I got the repairs sorted, and that was that. But what I'm saying here is that I didn't just dive in and put a whole new cooling system in the first time I got the car, and I drove it for quite a few kilometers with that coolant leak and it didn't explode on me, anything like that. So if you go about things sensibly, you don't have to just carpet bomb the whole cooling system with brand new parts and spend all that money. And as you know, if you've been following the series on my E46, we're running this car on a budget. 2 reasons. I want to be able to show you guys that you can run a relatively classic BMW on a budget, and the other reason is I don't have any money right now, so I'm kind of having to do it like this and have to make it work. So anyway, my car hasn't been overheating, the temperature gauge has been nice and in the middle. I haven't had the low coolant warning up, it hasn't been losing a lot of coolant, only a very small amount. Now, looking under the bonnet, which I like to do is maybe once every couple of weeks with one of these cars, check the oil, check the water, and give it a quick visual just to make sure everything looks okay. But this time didn't look great because I saw there was some coolant residue around near the top of the expansion tank where the radiator hose meets the expansion tank. Wasn't obvious at first where it was coming from, but I did manage to trace it back to the radiator bleed screw, which isn't in the radiator or the expansion tank. It's actually part of the upper hose where it connects to the expansion tank. Now, it's not unusual, especially with these cars getting a bit older, that the O-ring on the bleeder screw, the plastic bleeder screw, can start to leak. Now, I did have a brand new spare somewhere. I had a look around, I couldn't find it. So my second option, I was tempted just to unscrew it, put a new O-ring in, put it back together and see how it looks. But these bleeder screws being made out of plastic, it's not unusual for when you go to unscrew it that it can break, and I didn't want to end up in a situation where it sheared off, and then I didn't want to risk running the car with a bleeder screw only 2/3 of the depth there, and I need this car to get to work, so I couldn't muck around. But anyway, I kept the cooling system topped up. It didn't need much. I kept a close eye on things, so what I did, I ordered a new upper radiator hose, and I ordered it out of the States because it was much cheaper to buy it from over there and get it shipped here than it was to buy one in New Zealand. I've gone for a Rain branded one. I have used these before on previous E46s, and it is essentially an OEM hose. It's just got the BMW logo scrubbed off it. Right, if we take a look at the hose here, you can see there where the BMW logo was, and it's been milled off, so it's a genuine part by the OEM manufacturer. It's just been rebranded, made in Germany there, and the BMW logo scrubbed off. From the original manufacturer, made in Germany. It's going to be much better than some cheaper alternatives that you can get hold of. I've had good luck with these hoses, they're well made. My very first E46, the 325i wagon, I did do some coolant system work on that and had issues with an aftermarket expansion tank trying to fit the factory hose, so I always go for OEM or genuine parts when it comes to the E46 coolant systems now. And the hose wasn't a lot of money, and yes, it would have been nice to put a new expansion tank, thermostat, water pump and replace a few of the other hoses at the same time, but the other parts look fine. It would be unnecessary doing that right now. We're running this car on a budget. But anyway, enough of my yap, let's get on with the repair, eh? Now, going into this job, one thing you might want to consider is just getting the front end of the car up in the air and draining the coolant from the drain plug in the radiator, and you're not going to have to deal with coolant splashing and leaking out the hose when you disconnect everything. I'm going to postpone my coolant change. It's something that I've been wanting to do. I don't know what coolant's in the vehicle. I've never drained the coolant, never even had a look at it. The only thing I've seen is this bit of a splash here, so it kind of looks blue, but I don't know, and I'm not sure if it looks contaminated or whether it's just a bit of calcium. Maybe the previous owner used tap water in it, I don't know. But anyhow, just need to get this done today because I don't want this splitting apart and leaking and leaving me stranded. I don't want to risk overheating the engine. And then what we'll do is look at that coolant drain and flush and fill at a later date. And even if you're not going to drain the coolant, you might want to consider just removing the under tray, because we're bound to lose a little bit of coolant out here and it's going to splash down onto the top of the tray there. And then once you start the car up, the fan's going to run and it's going to basically spatter it all the way through your engine bay, and coolant does leave stains, so it can be a bit of a mess. I'm not going to bother with that today. It's getting into the evening now. I just want to get this job done. I want to get this leak sorted and get the car back on the road tonight. So there will be a bit of coolant that'll be sitting on top of the under tray once we've completed the job. What I'll do is I'll just go across and hose everything down afterwards. I'm pleased to be getting this job done today, even though I'm kind of backed into a corner with this leak going on. I have to get it done right now. But getting this hose replaced was something that I did want to do when I first bought the vehicle. When I gave the car a good look over, you can see there where the hose meets the plastic fitting, it looks like there's been a bit of leak or something going on there. There's a bit of residue or dried, and there's quite a lot of it there, so either that joint's leaking or it's trickled down from somewhere else. Either way, pleased to be getting it changed out today. And the only tools that we're going to need to do the job is a 10mm socket, a flat blade screwdriver, and then a small flat blade pocket screwdriver. Right, so to start off with, we'll just gingerly let the radiator cap relieve any residual pressure. There we go. And you can see the level's still sitting at just about the correct level here, so not losing a heap of coolant out of there. So next up, we'll remove these two 10mm bolts on the gearbox. Next, what we're going to do is just pop the two metal clamps at the back of the gearbox there to separate it from the MAF sensor. We'll remove this hose off the back of the gearbox. And now we can remove the gearbox, and that's going to give us much better access to our leaky hose. If we take a look at the new hose here, you can see we've got these retaining clips at each connection point, 3 of them. So what we need to do now, just release the connection points on the old hose, ready for removal. And you can see down there, that puddle that it started to make from the leak. You can see there, when they release, there is a stop point there that you can end up pulling them right off, but just be careful that you pull it off far enough so it just meets up that it's going to release, but not too far. So you just want to be sitting in that release point there. So before I go any further, I do need to be mindful of the fact that the plastic connection points that the hose connects to are 24 years old now, and that plastic is very likely to be hard, aged, and possibly brittle. And the last thing I need right now is to be breaking any other parts, because I just need to get this leaky hose replaced and get the car back on the road. It's my main work vehicle. It's my daily driver. I need it to get to and from work. So if I break something, not only have I got to then spend more money on it when it could have probably been avoided, but the other thing is the car's going to be off the road for some time while I source the parts and get them here. It's not like I've just got them on the shelf here. So we're going to proceed with caution. We're not just going to go tearing into it and pulling on the hose. And to start off with, what I might do is just give each connection point a squirt with some silicone spray now that the clips are released, just with the hope that some of it might seep in there and just lubricate things a little bit. Because I don't know how long this hose has been on here for, and it's likely to be very dry, and them O-rings will be very much baked onto the plastic. So we'll go for the expansion tank first. Just going to go very gently, just ease it off backwards and forwards. See it moving now. Down there, see it moving. And I'm holding the camera here, so I'm trying to do this one-handed at the same time too. That's free. We just don't want to break the neck of the radiator. Well, I think I'm going to have to get two hands on this. Right, so that's free, and I did find that when I got my other hand underneath there was a bit of a tab there to pull it off nice and square. It probably didn't help trying to do it one-handed. You can see by the mark on that radiator neck that that hose looks like it's been in position for a very long time. Right, let's move on to the thermostat end. There we go. And that's the old hose out. That's what I do now. I'm just going to go through and clean up these connection points, because we do want a proper seal, and it's not going to seal very well with that mark on there. So we'll give them a clean up before we attach the new hose, and I'll just have a bit of clean up around here, all this staining and everything, and in the future we can keep an eye on that area just to make sure we don't have any further leaks. I'm just going to be using a bit of multi-purpose cleaner on a rag. And I'll continue on with this. That's the three connection points now all cleaned up, and you can see on the radiator neck there, still do have that orange mark there. I've been over it, it is all flush, it is just a stain that. There was a bit of raised material stuck on the outer side of the O-ring, or where the O-ring would have sat, just where muck and dirt has built up. So I've just made sure I've removed all the high material just with the cleaner and the rag. I've been over it several times, and that's nice and smooth now. So that's going to give that new O-ring the best chance of sealing. So now it's time to fit the new hose. Now with the clips on the connections, we're going to make sure that they're in the down position, as if they were already connected to the car, and they literally just push on and you'll hear a nice positive click. Just going to make sure all of them are pushed right the way down before we put it on the car. And what I'm going to do is just lubricate the O-rings in the three connection points with some silicone spray, just so it slides on there nice and easy. So I'm going to put the thermostat end on first, just make sure the hose is orientated correctly. Start on the radiator. There we go. Just make sure that's secure on the expansion tank too. And it is worth just double checking the clips there just to make sure they are fully seated, because sometimes what can happen is one side will locate and the other side won't. That all looks all right to me. So now we're ready to give the system a top up and then give it a bleed. Now, as you saw when we removed the old hose, although we did lose a little bit of coolant there, it wasn't a huge amount, and even if this hose was completely full, you'd be lucky if that was even a litre that, so shouldn't need a huge top up. We'll start off by removing the expansion tank cap. As you can see, that's actually showing pretty full already. There might be a bit of air down there though. And what I'm going to do is remove the bleeder screw with the flat blade screwdriver. So before I start topping the cooling system up, what I do need to do is just jump in the car and turn on the heater system without running the engine. And what that's going to do is just going to cycle that coolant through the system, and it's going to bleed any air out of this high point. Now, there are different ways you can bleed the cooling system in the E46, but I'll show you the way that I normally do it. Next, we're going to turn the ignition to position 1, and then without the engine running, we're going to turn the heater up to the highest temperature and the lowest fan speed. There we go. So I do have 2 litres of water here. It's unlikely that we're going to need anywhere near this amount. So although the system does look pretty full at the moment, if we look at the level indicator there, what we need to do is fill it right up so we have coolant coming out the bleed point here and no bubbles. So start topping it up, and you need to fill it up slowly, otherwise you're going to trap air in the system. So the system is almost full because we barely lost anything out of the hose when we removed it, so we don't need to go pouring it in too fast, just nice and slowly. You can see it coming up in the expansion tank there, and then that bleeder point should follow it shortly. See it coming up there now. Now nearly at the top of the filler neck. There we go. So we'll just stop there. I don't want it to overspill. I'll just let that belch a wee bit. You can see the bubbles coming out the bleeder point. And that'll settle. More bubbles. Just give that upper radiator hose a bit of a squeeze, just gently, just to get rid of them bubbles. Give it another top up. You can now see as it rises to the top, the bleeder point there, it's just solid liquid, no more bubbles, so we can now put the bleeder screw back in, and just be careful reinstalling that bleeder screw because it is made of plastic. You don't want to cross thread it. There we go. And we don't need to go mad tightening it up because it is only plastic and you are just compressing that O-ring slightly. Just give it a little bit. There we go. And now we can reinstall the expansion tank cap. Now this is the way I normally bleed the cooling system on an E46. So as you could see, as the heater was running without the engine running, we filled the system right up. Now it looks like we've overfilled the system because the level indicator was already more or less at the correct height, and we've gone way above that. Now, under normal circumstances you wouldn't want to do that because it can create excessive pressure in the system, but the reason we've done that at the minute is because we've had a component of the cooling system removed. We need to displace that air with coolant, so we've filled it right up to this high point, the bleed point, and that's bled all the air out the system. We've had the heater running, so it's made sure it's cycling through the heater box and everything. That should be air free now. But now we're left with a high level, so what I normally do is run the engine up to temperature, keeping a close eye on the temperature gauge. You don't want it to go past halfway, and at the same time also just double checking all these connection points that we've had disrupted, just to make sure they are all seated 100% and nothing's leaking. And then once it's been running up to temperature, shut it off and then let the engine cool right down. Normally I'll leave it overnight, and then I'll come back in the morning and just double check the level, and in most cases the level will have reduced. Normally you need to give it a little bit of a top up just to get that level indicator back to the maximum position. In some cases I've had to siphon a little bit out, but more or less it should be at the correct level, whereas at the moment we're way above. We're right up to the base of the filler neck pretty much. So what I'm going to do next is turn the ignition off. I'll refit the heater box, and then I'm just going to give all this area a spray down with the hose pipe just to get rid of all this coolant, because once that dries it's going to leave stains all over the place. It ain't going to look pretty. And the other thing is, once it's all dried, we can then carry out a visual inspection just every now and again, and if there is any white marks from coolant residue, you know that it's from a leak, not just from what's splashed around today. Well, let's get the ignition off and the earbox back on. Right, so I've let the car warm up and it's sitting nicely in the centre of the temperature gauge there. Checked it for leaks, everything looks okay. So it's the next morning and the E46 has been sat overnight to cool down. If we turn the ignition on without starting the engine, that temperature gauge is cold. So now we'll pull the expansion tank cap off and take a look at the level. So we take a look down there. I don't know if you can see, but the level has definitely reduced a fair bit, but it is still sitting a little bit high. So what I'm going to do is reduce the level slightly just to make sure that this level indicator isn't pushed right up. It will just be just at its top point without being too full. I'll show you a wee trick for that. Right, so what I'm going to do, I've got an old cleaning product bottle here which I've cleaned out. I'm just going to use the nozzle from it. I'm going to stick that down in the expansion tank and square it out until it's at the correct level, and I'm going to put it into a clear container just so I can see what type of coolant's in there and maybe just get a look at the condition of it. Perfect. Looks genuine to me, although a little bit pale. Certainly ready for a refresh, but it doesn't look too contaminated, so maybe it was just a little bit of dirt on top of the expansion tank that was mixing with the old leaky fluid. So one thing I did notice with the expansion tank cap while I've been busy is the plastic was getting all old and aged and brittle, and you can see there that section there is broken off. Well, that was just cracked and sort of hanging off, so I've pulled it off just so it didn't end up in the expansion tank while I've been busy. So this is not looking in good shape. It's certainly at the end of its life, but luckily I've got the old expansion tank cap off my old X5. When I replaced the expansion tank, I did keep the old one because it looks in half good shape, much better than the other one. So I can thank my past self for hanging on to that in the parts hoard, and this can go back on the car for now. It's cost me nothing. Sorted. Alright guys, so there we have it. That's that little job sorted. We've got rid of that old cracked leaky radiator hose. We've got the new upper radiator hose in there now. We've got the cooling system bled and everything's looking good to go. So the cooling system's up and running back to normal, and we've done it with minimal money spent and minimal effort, and that's the whole idea on this budget E46. We are doing it on a budget, but we're not cutting corners. We're still doing things properly, and I hope that any of you guys out there who own one of these cars and who might be struggling financially at the minute, like a lot of people are, I hope this video helps you guys out, and if it does, don't forget to give it a like, and make sure you go and check out the rest of my YouTube channel for more BMW E46 budget repair videos. Consider subscribing if that's your cup of tea. I'm MTech Guy. Thanks a lot for watching.